Now, just a quick warning before we get started that this video will of course contain spoilers for the latest episode of Clone Wars called Dangerous Debt. So if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it's a really good time to click away. That said, this episode I'd say was better than the previous two in the arc, even though it basically ends the same way the last one did, with everyone getting captured. And it looks pretty clear now that the whole purpose of giving us this arc, instead of one of the many others they could have picked from or creating a whole new one, is because of its connection to the last arc not only of the season, but the whole series, that of course being the Siege of Mandalore. It's also no doubt to give us, or show us perhaps, some more growth out of Ahsoka, and more on that in a bit. But first here we see that Bo-Katan and a few other Mandalorians are on Obadiah for whatever reason and have spotted Ahsoka and are keeping tabs on her and will almost certainly be helping her out or rescuing her in the final episode of this arc next week, which will somehow lead to Ahsoka going off with Bo-Katan to help retake Mandalore, which again is what the final arc of this season or series is essentially about. And if Ahsoka is with the Mandalorians for a while, this could sort of patch up the timeline a little bit, which is something I talked about in my previous reviews. That it seems as if Ahsoka has more or less gone straight from leaving the Jedi Order, as seen at the end of Season 5, down into the lower levels of Coruscant where she meets the Martez sisters. Which doesn't seem to make much sense if this arc leads directly into the Siege of Mandalore, that not enough time would go by. However, that could easily be cleared up if Ahsoka works with the Mandalorians for a while, feeling as if, Jedi or not, she can't just sit back and do nothing, so she takes up their cause. And she even talks about in this episode that she lives by the philosophy that if you come across people who need help, you help them. So in the end here, or the final episode of this arc, I think the Martez sisters figure out that she was a Jedi, and that instead of staying with them, which they'll likely offer since it's clear Rafa is starting to come around in regards to Ahsoka, I think, that she has to go help the Mandalorians. That's what a true Jedi should or would do. This will of course change the perception of the Jedi for the sisters, even though Ahsoka herself no doubt was given more reasons to question the Jedi in this episode. And I'm of course referring to the little story we got about Zero's escape, which is something we saw way back in Season 1, and that the Jedi pursued him down the portal into the lower levels until Cad Bane shot the engines of a cargo ship, which sent it spiraling towards a crowded landing platform, but the Jedi diverted it into the walls of the portal, which killed the sisters' parents. It then sounds as if Luminara, according to Rafa's description, told the sisters that the Jedi had to make a choice, but not to worry, the Force will be with you, which I'm sure was of little comfort to the sisters and is a pretty good reason for them not to be so fond of the Jedi. Hearing all this quite obviously gave Ahsoka something to think about as well, hearing about all the collateral damage that happens when the Jedi, though they have the best of intentions usually, try to help out or do what they feel is the right thing, which trying to stop Cad Bane and apprehend Zero was, at least to them. Yet to do these things that they feel they must, they are sometimes faced with impossible situations, like choosing between the lesser of two evils, or to take something from a different space franchise, that at times you must put the needs of the many ahead of the needs of the few. However, that's usually of little consolation to the few, or to the loved ones of the few who have lost their life. And it was interesting to see this or hear this story and be reminded of the price the common person sometimes very unwillingly pays. It further begins to explain why people maybe don't have the best of opinions of the Jedi at this point, that they maybe see them as reckless or that they needlessly endangered lives in pursuit of this criminal, a criminal that was let go because the lives of several senators and a Jedi were at stake, again as seen in the episode way back in Season 1 called Hostage Crisis. And depending on the way this story was spun on the Hollow News, and I'm sure Palpatine wouldn't somehow be exerting his influence over them to report the news how he wants it to, likely this could be portrayed as the Jedi not willing to give the life of one of their own, keeping in mind Anakin was one of the hostages, in order to keep a dangerous criminal behind bars. So instead they let him out and put the lives of others at stake in an attempt to recapture him. In other words, the lives of the common folk were less valuable than the life of a Jedi or senators. And not to go too far off topic, but maybe this is a good time to remind everyone, especially considering the craziness in the world currently, that no matter what side of the political spectrum you fall on or where you get your news from, most sources today seem more interested in telling you a story from their perspective than they are in just trying to tell you the facts and what really unobjectively happened, and then letting you come to your own conclusions. My advice is to always be skeptical when someone tells you what happened and then immediately tells you what it means or how to think or feel about it. Because for a while I always found it kind of unbelievable that the galaxy could turn on the Jedi so quickly, that so many in the time period of the original trilogy seem to have completely forgotten them or really and truly believe what the Empire says about them. And though I'll still argue it's odd for people who lived through the Clone Wars to have forgotten the Jedi, I don't find it odd in the least anymore that so many seem to believe everything was their fault. And yeah, to some extent they do deserve some blame for the Clone Wars, don't get me wrong. And though it should seem impossible for an order that for 1,000 generations kept the peace in the Republic to be vilified and have so many turn against them so quickly, when you look at the world today, it doesn't seem quite so odd anymore. I mean, one wrong word on Twitter and no matter who you are, an angry mob with virtual pitchforks will come for you and try to destroy your life, and in some cases they succeed. And so again, if the Hollow News happened to keep framing things against the Jedi every time something went wrong, I'm sure many started to just believe it. As they say, knowledge is power, but in today's world and likely in the Star Wars galaxy at this time, perhaps a better, more accurate saying is whoever distributes knowledge or information is the one who truly has power. Whoever controls the narrative can easily control people who never question anything. And I know it sounds like I'm going off the deep end here, but this is where my brain went thanks to this episode of Clone Wars, though I don't think that was their intent with this episode. Anyway, to get back to it and to sum up this episode, it was probably the best of the arc thus far. Decent amount of action, gave you something to think about, maybe too much in my case, and brought Bo-Katan into the mix and is steering us towards the final arc and the end of the Clone Wars series. Now, would giving us a different arc altogether maybe have been better? Probably. But if this final arc coming up, the Siege of Mandalore of course, is as good as I think it'll be, all will be forgiven. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think of this episode and this arc so far. Was it good, or is it falling flat with you? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.